overhead to wrap up chapter 10 and get into chapter 11. So we've mentioned the ups and downs of the economy, and this is just kind of giving us an idea of what does the real economy do and how long do these recessions last. And so on the left-hand column here, we've got the expansions. So that's when the economy is expanding. And over here is the recessions. And so those are the number of recessions dating back to, how far back we go, 1949, so post-World War II. And so what is longer in length, expansions or recessions? Expansions, which means over time, what's happening to economic growth? Is it getting bigger or smaller? Bigger, right? So we have long-term, long-run economic growth, and this is kind of one way to think about it. Now, we actually don't know this, looking at it this way doesn't show the severity of the downturn. So it's possible that it went way down every time and it kind of wiped out all the gains, but that turns out not to be true. So this is giving us some support to these cycles of the economy, but now we're adding a little more detail that the ups tend to be a little bit more longer than the downs, right? And we get this trend line here. So we're trying to build the case that we've got this long run full employment level of GDP, kind of the optimal for the economy to be humming at, so to speak. And then we've got the actual fluctuations in the economy. And so a lot of what we're talking about with chapter 10 and 11 are the actual levels relative to the long run levels. Okay, so we spent some time with anticipated and unanticipated changes. What was the difference? How much effect does an anticipated change have on the economy, on economic variable? Not much, right? I see some people shaking their heads. So anticipated changes really don't do anything. Maybe you guys have even seen this with stock prices and stuff, that once we start to see there's changes going on and people are expecting that stock price is going to go up, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because people start buying now and driving up the stock price, right? So they kind of go in harmony together when they start reacting to their expectations. All right, so the story really falls on unanticipated changes. And so yesterday in your notes, we had the Nadia effect, and I think that was this one. Essentially, if we have an unanticipated change in aggregate demand, so something happens and boom, we weren't expecting it. What's the impact of that? In this case, some foreigners were buying more of our products, so it was a positive effect in terms of pumping up output. But if it's not something that's going to stick around, if it was more of a temporary shock, then that increase will, in the long run, we will head back to where we were if there was nothing that fundamentally changed this one. What were the long run aggregate supply shifters? I really want you guys to have those memorized. Look back, just the long run shifters. Actually, I'd like you to memorize all of them, but the long run shifters are really important because that's the real economy going on. Justin?
Increase of quantity of resources.
Okay, the quantity of resources we have in the economy. So, one way to look at this is when foreigners had more money, did that lead to real increases in the quantity of resources? Our resource base probably didn't change. We might be able to weave some sort of story where there was a little bit of an effect or something, but especially if it was temporary, it didn't change our resource base, so there we stay stuck. What was the other thing? Yeah,
Technology.
technology, so technological advance. Did foreigners increasing income change technology in our country? No, not in and of itself, right? So again, there's nothing that would fundamentally change where we're going to be in the long run. And then what was the last one? Labor force. Okay, that was part of the quantity of resources, right? But yes, that would be, so the quantity of resources was really the broad category. And then we had land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, and I gave you some examples of that. But I think we had one more for number 3. Madison?
Is it institutional improvement?
Yes, so institutional changes. That would be like our government or how we run things and some policy changes. Did the increase in foreigners' income change our institutions in the United States? Change our government or something, our policies? No, right? So they just have more money and they bought more of our stuff. So if there's nothing that ultimately impacted the long run aggregate supply, then what we'd expect from an unanticipated increase in demand would be a proportional increase or some sort of adjustment in resource prices that would bring us back to where our full employment level was. Okay, questions or comments on that? All right, so then, this is one we didn't do in class. What if we have a negative demand shock? So we could say foreign incomes fall, we could pick another demand shifter, but something negatively affects the economy. Here was our original long run equilibrium where all 3 lines cross. And now we had maybe a change in expectations on profits for companies. And so there was a dramatic decrease in investment purchases. And so investment demand fell, and so aggregate demand fell. What's going to be the impact of that change? Where is the economy always heading? Just looking at this graph, in the long run, where's it heading? Jesse?
Vertical, the long run.
Yes, long run, but I need one more piece of information. So we're heading towards the long run, where it intersects with the actual aggregate demand curve, which in this case is the new aggregate demand curve. So if that change is going to be there, then prices are the adjusting mechanism. Prices are going to adjust to the current market conditions, and those prices are, the resource prices are going to make some adjustments, bringing us back to now a new long-run equilibrium, back to full employment. So the economy went into recession maybe, but then the economy recovered, coming back to full employment with a lower prices. Okay, questions on that one? All right. Yesterday we did an oil price shock, which is the one we'll end on today, but what if we have prices go the other way? So maybe there is the textbook's using here a bumper crop year. So we've had really great growing conditions in the Midwest, and so the corn is plentiful. What happens to corn prices if corn supply is high? It's a bumper crop. Corn prices fall, right? So if corn is a pretty important input to a lot of things, tortillas and other food products, feed for cattle, you name it. If corn prices are low, then that could cause a reduction in the output prices over time. So the immediate effect might be a decrease in the price level for food products for output. But where are we heading in the long run if indeed that was a temporary good year, and next year who knows what holds? We're not expecting the weather to do us good forever. Where are we heading in this picture, Tim? Back to E1. So the initial effect might be a drop in the prices of the output at Walmart, the stuff on the shelves at Walmart, but then eventually we're going to have resource prices start to adjust and move back to E1. And so we're always coming back to the intersection of the aggregate demand curve and long-run aggregate supply curve. Okay, questions or comments there? All right, and finally, here's the one we left off with yesterday. And so we had a oil price shock. So in the resource market, there was a decrease in supply bringing up the prices. And so we had the economy have a little bit of stagflation, which is a combination of stagnation, a fall in output, maybe a recession here, and an upward pressure on the price level. Some inflation and stagnation got coined as stagflation in the 1970s. And so where are we headed in the long run? Back to the intersection of aggregate demand and long run aggregate supply. There'll be some price adjustments if that shock was temporary. And so here's a little bit of an amendment to put on there. What I gave you yesterday was a temporary shock. If there's something that changed fundamentally the supply of oil or resources or something, if the quantity of resources was impacted for the long haul, what happens to the long run aggregate supply curve? If the price was somehow intertwined with a long run reduction in resources, what happens to the long run aggregate supply curve?
It moves to meet the other two, not the other way around.
Yeah, it'll move to the left or to the right?
Left.
To the left. So we start drifting this way. And so as we drift this way, and this one maybe starts to drift, maybe we meet somewhere in the middle, or if it's a dramatic enough thing, maybe it comes all the way here, right? And so if that is the case, we have a permanent decrease in the potential for the economy because of the reduction in resources. That's usually not a big factor, but if it was something of a natural disaster, if we go down to Haiti and we look at a hurricane that wiped out the whole country almost, right, and all the infrastructure, that might be looking something like that. That it's going to be a longer run reduction in productive capacity of Haiti because of all the infrastructure being wiped out. And then over time, we might have reinvestment into that, and it'll start going back to the right. Okay, any questions there? So all of this, chapter 10 again, was invisible, what I call invisible hand stuff. I don't think the textbook necessarily calls it invisible hand stuff, but it is the market system adapting through prices to correct whatever was going on and bring us back to long run equilibrium. So now we're going to enter into chapter 11. And in chapter 11, we are influenced by John Maynard Keynes. So what we presented in this last chapter historically is pretty much how economists thought of the economy, that prices will adjust, that the economy is basically in a long run equilibrium. So let me write a couple of these notes to get us going on this chapter. So, chapter 11. Enter government policy. Okay, so prior to let's even say 36. Prior to 1936. What happened in the 1930s? The Great Depression. So the Great Depression, where you've maybe seen some old pictures from history books and other things, we weren't in very good shape. The economy was in pretty rough shape. Well, that ended up being kind of a turning point in economics. So prior to 1936, economics was only microeconomics. We didn't have macroeconomics for the most part. So what does that mean? You know, the prevailing theories, the prevailing theory was that price adjustments through market exchanges reflected a long-run equilibrium for the economy. All right, so then we get into the 1930s. So let's just put a little timeline here. 1930, Great Depression showed long-lasting, I'll put it in quotes, but disequilibrium, where the economy struggled to get to our full employment level. We kind of looked around and said, gosh, 25% of unemployment, that can't be equilibrium, is it? Are we in some sort of new world where 20%, 25% unemployment? So for example, unemployment rates of 20%. That's pretty bad. And it lasted for a while. So people started questioning, well, is something broken here with the system? All right, so then in 1936, John Maynard Keynes wrote a book called The General Theory. And it was actually his dissertation for his doctorate degree. And so you come out with the general theory, it's like, whoa, well, you must think you know a lot, right, as a new graduate. And so the general theory laid out a case that maybe we should use government spending as a means to help correct market downfalls or market shortcomings. So the general gist of it, that we'll spend a little more time on it, is to use government spending to smooth out the business cycle. The business cycle is our ups and downs of real GDP. So once again, let's put on here our real GDP and do some ups and downs. And we think that somewhere in here is kind of the average trend line, our potential real GDP, our full employment level, potential GDP. And so Keynes' thought was, the government's a pretty big spender. Could we use the government to smooth out the ride? And so in theory, he proposed being able to maybe do something like this. Wouldn't it be better if we could have a ride that looked like this? So his big question was, can we use government spending? And maybe I'll just put government, let me just put government policy because it goes beyond spending. Government policy to reduce fluctuations. All right, any questions so far?
Well, can we?
That'll be what we'll test here. Let's say there today still exists. I think some of what he's done, no economist really agrees with, but there's still some economists that cling to parts of the concept, others that say it's garbage. And so this is really where the tension in economics is on different ways of viewing this. So that's what we'll explore. So, again, just to kind of knit a few things together here. So recall our cigarettes. The economy's all about cigarettes. We can think about the spending of the economy broke into these categories. And so Keynes, especially coming out of the Great Depression era, somewhat related anyway to the Great Depression, what happened to the stock market in 1929? Crash and burn. So we had a big correction in the stock market. So there was, that was related, but remember, that's not the Depression. So I always hesitate to even bring that up, but stock prices going up and down is a different thing, but of course there is some connection because the business is out there. This is part of what led to Keynes' theory here, is he thought the primary driver of these ups and downs is volatile investment demand. So in Keynes' theory, they thought this was the culprit. So investment by businesses, so volatile investment demand. He called it the animal spirits. So kind of the key driver here, one of the key drivers, the major cause of fluctuations is animal spirits. Animal spirits of business and investment.
Animal spirits?
Yeah.
Why?
So you kind of got this unruly lion or tiger or that we have to tame. It's not the obedient golden retriever animal, but rather this untamable beast that causes these fluctuations. And so investments are subject to speculation and rumors and other things. And so it tends to lead to this volatility in this particular element of the spending. All right, so the other second part to this, so we got the animal spirits is one thing, but the other thing he claimed is we have sticky wages. Sticky wages. I'm putting this stuff in quotes because these are the words you'll see come out either in the text or some other things. These are quotes from the general theory. So sticky wages is something I've been already talking about, that prices of outputs might change, but wages are lagging behind, right? So this concept of lagging behind. So sticky wages was implying that the lag time for resource price adjustment is long. So wages tend to be sticky. All right, and so the implication of that, I'll just put a little short graph here, is that if we have sticky wages, let's see, we're going to put real GDP and the price level. We have a fairly flat short-run aggregate supply curve. And then if we have some sort of aggregate demand curve that is fluctuating from volatile investment this thing being flat, flatter means more sticky wages. And we get bigger movements in real GDP, bigger swings. So sticky wages and volatile investment in land, this gap here is big fluctuations. We'll just leave the long run curve out of that one. All right, so at the end of the day here, if this one's going down, we can use this now to save the day. So volatile investment band, use this to smooth out. So if this one goes up, we just make this one go down and it smooths it out. If this one goes down, we make this one go up and it smooths it out. Kind of the key point here is use offsetting changes in G to changes in investment to smooth out the cycle. All right, so that kind of lays out the Keynesian case. Does anybody have any questions? You know, for this being your first introduction to it, it sounds pretty plausible, right? I mean, does it sound reasonable that we could change government policy to offset the, you know, something bad's happening and we do some more? You know, it has kind of a plausible type of feel to it. So it was widely embraced, especially by some certain people in the economy. Who are our general economic agents in the economy that we identify like through this picture? Corporations, so businesses. Who else is in here? The government in the middle, and then who's over here? The people. Who are the people called in class? The household. So just people, but we call them households because there could be a family of 5 or a family of 2 or a single household or whatever. So people who live in houses, but it's the people in general. So those are kind of our 3, and then of course don't forget the rest of the world up here. So we've got kind of those economic agents at play in the grand scheme of things, generalizing things. Who of those people do you think like the idea of using government policy to help people out that are unemployed? Households, they might have liked it. Who does it empower?
Businesses.
Who gets the power? If we take Keynes' prescription here, who all of a sudden gains power? Tucker? The government does, right? So the government does because in order for the government to have money, they need to charge more what? Taxes. And are taxes voluntary? No. So by force, the government gets more taxes, giving our politicians and bureaucrats more power to make changes. Now, they might have kind hearts. I'm not trying to paint too negative of a picture, but I don't want to paint too positive of a picture either, because we're dealing with human beings, right? We remember that from chapter 7, that we don't have angels running the government. And so people in the government, both politicians and bureaucrats, employees of the government, kind of embraced this because it empowered them, right? And so that made some sense to them. All right, so that's kind of where we start things off. So we got a few more things to think about how the money gets into the system. So one of the claims here to get things running is the idea of a multiplier. So the multiplier effect. So the multiplier principle. The multiplier principle is an increase in spending creates additional spending. So, for example, OU in August. So, Otto University in August. We'll kind of bring down to a little bit more of a micro example here for the city of Ottawa. So, OU in August, what happens to the population of Ottawa? In August, when you guys come back, it goes up. So, OU in August brings in let's just say 1,000 college students from outside the city of Ottawa. What do you guys do when you get here? What's one of the first stops you make? Walmart, right? So you go to Walmart. So you go to Walmart and buy, let's say, I guess we'll just say $100 of stuff. What does Walmart do with that money you just gave them?
Use it to pay the workers that also just gave.
Use it to pay their resources in general, but yeah, I like to kind of think about the workers as part of that. So some fraction of that is going to be paid to the workers. So that $100 is spent on the resources needed for the stuff you bought. So some of it might be heading off on the supply chain to China or something. Some of it will be some local wages that are going. So let's just assume the paychecks to locals is $50. So now you live in town, you work for Ottawa, or you work for Walmart, you get your paycheck, what do you do with it?
Spend it.
You spend it. You spend some fraction of it, right? So then local spends $50 at Pizza Village. What do the Pizza Village owners do with it? What do the Pizza Village owners do with the money? Spend it on their resources. So then they have the wait staff and their people. They get a paycheck. What do those people do with it? They spend it. So there's kind of this spending thing going on. And if we go back to the big formula here with cigarettes, it's possible then that if the government comes in and buys weapons of mass destruction from Guns R Us, a good American company, they pay their paychecks for the weapons that was produced. They make their payments to their consumers. The consumers then run to Walmart and Pizza Village, and they start spending. And then that spending becomes income for somebody else, and so on and so on and so on. All right. Any questions on that? That's kind of the multiplier principle. We'll continue here to leave some of that on. All right, so now we're going to have a little bit of math, hopefully not too much math. So the expenditure multiplier. The expenditure multiplier is a number that reflects the ultimate change in income. The change in income for the nation a number that reflects the ultimate change in income from a change in, let's just call it outside spending. All right, so to build up to that number, we gotta do a little intermediate step. And we're gonna look at the marginal propensity to consume. The marginal propensity to consume. I want you guys to really think to yourselves this time and tell me what your marginal propensity to consume. If I was to give you $100 today, how much of that would you save and how much of that would you consume? What fraction would you consume of the $100? How many of you would just go out and blow the whole 100? It's like free money. All right.
How long does it have to be in your bank account for it to be considered saving?
Well, don't worry about that at this point. I'll come back to you. So how many of you would go out and consume it, blow your money? How many people would take 90% and maybe spend that, but maybe tuck 10% away, tuck 10 bucks? All right, so everybody's a little bit different on how they would take that money in, but in aggregate for the nation, we can take the average of all of you, right? And so the marginal propensity to consume, the MPC, is the fraction of money, fraction of your income, a fraction of income that goes to consumption. So in the big picture over here, that is C, consumption. Consumption for the nation. So how much of your income is going to go towards consumption? So from a formula standpoint, the marginal propensity to consume is equal to the change in consumption from a change in income. So I give you an additional $100 of income. How much of that do you go out and consume? The change in consumption from the change in income. Okay, so how can the government bring some money from the outside? How can they spend money that they didn't collect in taxes? What do they do? What does our government do to spend money that they don't bring in taxes? They do some borrowing, right? They do some loans. So, let me do this as a little intermediate thing here. How can government spend money that it did not collect in taxes? And the answer is do some borrowing. right, so this is called the government deficit. So a budget deficit, is the borrowing. We'll get into defining that a little bit more tomorrow, but I want to get to this next part. But that's kind of how we can get some outside money dropping into the system. All right, so let's do a little example here. If the change in government spending is, let's see, what do I do here? Oh, let's just do $1,000. If the change in government spending with a deficit, if the change in government spending is $10,000 with a deficit, what is the impact on the change in income for the nation if the marginal propensity to consume is 0.1? I'm sorry, 0.9. So 90% of our income is going towards consumption. So let's just track this. So let's kind of think of this in terms of round one of spending. There's a change in income from the 1,000 to Guns R Us. So this is Guns R Us. An American company gets income from the government for the purchase of the weapons of mass destruction. It pays its people. How much of that income ultimately gets consumed? How much of that income gets consumed? 90%. So the change in consumption is 900 from this government policy. But then they run to Walmart and spend 900. So now we've got Walmart in round two getting $900. Walmart pays its people, and now they have 10% of 900 is 90. So there's $810 of consumption by the Walmart employees. They run to Pizza Village and buy $810 worth of pizza. So round three starts here. And so on and so on and so on. And so now you see the chain here of the initial change in government spending through deficit was 1,000, but it also added 900 and 810, and so there's this multiplying effect. Turns out to be BS, but we'll have that exciting, that's my cliffhanger to you, that it turns out to not work out as slick as it does on paper here. We'll bring that up tomorrow.